Good morning. Day 3 of Tech Ed. And you're about to experience the best session of Tech Ed because this morning we're talking about HTML5 and CSS3. I figured we'd kick things off here in kind of a fun way. Obviously, it's early morning. I appreciate you guys getting out of bed. I appreciate myself getting out of bed this morning to come do this. But we've got a really exciting topic for a really exciting technology. And hopefully today, we can leave you guys with some very practical information you can take out to start using and adopting some of HTML5 and CSS3. Now, I put up on the screen here a few times during this morning a little star field demo here, kind of running in the background. It actually looks a lot faster on the big screens than it does right here on my local screen. And the reason I did this is because I think you might be surprised to find out what this is. How many people think that this is HTML5? Okay, this is a sanity check. This is an HTML5 session. This is HTML5. I wouldn't do anything else to start this. But would you believe, if I were to zoom out, that this is running in IE6? So the title of today's session is HTML5 and CSS3 that you can use today. And I start with this to emphasize that I recognize we can't all target the latest browsers. Not every user is running IE9 yet. Not every user is running the latest version of Firefox or Chrome. So how can we adopt techniques that allow us to not only run in those browsers, but also support, in some ways, browsers like IE6 as well? So we'll start on that note, and then let's set ourselves up a little bit more completely. So first, some then introductions. My name is Todd Englund. I'm chief evangelist for a company called Telerik, which hopefully many of you are aware of. If not, we're out on the expo floor, and you can find me out there afterwards. Also, Microsoft MVP and ASP Insider, so very involved in the web. The web is my deep area of exploration. I love it, and we're going to have a fun time with it today. And also, I'm from the Houston area, so I'm the president of NorthHouston.net user group. If you want to find me online, if you want to find more demos or find some of the things that we're doing today, TelerickWatch.com is where I blog most often. And if you happen to be on Twitter, then you can find me there at Todd Englund, and I'll be sharing another Twitter handle with you today that's specific to today's topic, HTML5 and CSS3. So if you're looking for those resources, then definitely jump on there. And I usually find that there are people that avoid Twitter, sometimes on principle. They don't want to see what I had for lunch. Neither do I. I don't want to tell you what I had for lunch. So it's a strict resources rule there, so you find great links to help you out. So the way we're going to progress through this today, because we have a lot of information to cover and we don't have a lot of time. In fact, right now I still have a full 75 minutes. So if we could start the time down so that I make sure we don't run on for a few hours here today. First, we need to set the stage. We need to understand how the web is evolving. So we're going to take about 15 or 20 minutes there. So bear with me. We'll get to a lot of great demos. But we need to understand how is the web evolving and how does that impact you as web developers. So to make sure we're all on the same page, how many people today consider themselves web developers? This is a stretch test, get your blood going in the morning. So that's the majority of the room. So we're going to start and operate today under that assumption that you're a web developer today, and a lot of the web techniques of today are familiar, but perhaps we need to make sure we're on the same page for the future. And then we'll split up and talk about things you can use today from HTML5 and things you can use today from CSS3. My goal today is that you leave with at least one HTML5 or CSS3 technique that you can actually use today. So this is not a theoretical, which you might be able to use tomorrow or when in 2 or 3 years the browsers finally reach you that you want to target. Find a technique that you like, try it. That's the only way you'll retain stuff today, and have fun with that. While it continues to serve as a rough guide to many of the core features of HTML, it does not provide enough information to build implementations that interoperate with each other, and more importantly, with critical mass of deployed content. This is dense standards body language, which essentially means HTML4 was a rough guide for HTML. This is the W3C, the people that work on the standards for defining HTML, among other groups, basically saying that because HTML4 was a rough guide, browsers could have a lot of wiggle room, let's call it, to decide how to implement that. So what did that lead to? For us as web developers, we should know this today. It's created a lot of our developer pain. It's led to unpredictable browser support. Two browsers may say they offer the same feature, but we often experience that it requires two very different ways to do things, or maybe we just can't do things in certain browsers. Same has been true for JavaScript, especially the same has been true for CSS over the years. And so the standards body is essentially saying, yeah, we get that. The way we've done it in the past has been a problem. It's left too much up to the imagination of the people that actually implement the browsers. So there must be something new then. There's a shift. How is the web then going to evolve past the way it's been done? Up till now with HTML4, CSS2 really, it's been a very retrospective look. We, as a standards body, look at what's being done and basically say, okay, that's pretty much standard now. But as the web evolves, things are starting to evolve a little bit differently to the benefit of us as web developers, which is all of us in the room today. So we start talking about the evolution of the web. We're really talking about the evolution of three technologies: HTML5 or HTML, CSS, and EMCA-script, or basically, as we all call it, JavaScript. Collectively, these things are often referred to as HTML5. So if you don't learn anything else today, start and retain this. HTML5 is not a thing. HTML5 is an umbrella term of many things. In fact, it's made up of not only one spec or one draft, it's made up of lots of drafts that happen to be in a lot of different current evolving states. So among the things that HTML5 is talking about delivering, things like improved audio and video support, things like offline mode, new APIs for handling the browser's history and cache and all the various things you can do in the browsers, to modern things like WebGL for graphics, which I think has been in the news recently as well. Some groups working on the future of HTML have decided that this is best referred to as kind of a living standard, which means that to some, HTML5 really doesn't even need the 5 anymore. It's just HTML, and it's evolving iteratively into the future. So what happens then is that as these various things evolve under this umbrella of HTML5, certain things get a little bit more defined, a little bit more refined than others. The browser makers say, you know, we all pretty much now agree how this should be done. We can create interoperable implementations, so your browser pretty much does what my browser does as well. And these things start to solidify, and these things start to make up the picture of what we can actually use today in the broadly deployed set of browsers that we have to target. Because as web developers, the reality is, generally, we're trying to achieve reach. We're trying to target anybody, anywhere, whether it be on devices, whether it be on traditional computers or laptops. We have to target a broad range of those form factors as well as browsers. The way browsers implement these features is different, so I think it's worthwhile also talking a little bit about how that's done. If we wanted to divide these features into different categories, this is not a formal grouping that the standards bodies put out there, so this is a grouping that I've sort of assembled for you to give you some sense of where we're at today. Certain technologies are more stable than others. So canvas tag, for instance. This is a pretty stable API for HTML5. In fact, it's about as near complete as you can call anything HTML5, and all of the modern browsers currently support this. And we'll take a look at it today. Local storage is also in that category. There's a lot of APIs here that, in fact, go all the way back to IE8 and very old versions of the other browsers as well. These are the things that, when you're talking about what can I use today, they're generally going to come out of this category, things that are stable that people agree on. There's a whole other category, though, of things that we might just broadly call in progress. They're very cool things like drag and drop API in the browser for native drag and drop, so you don't need JavaScript to do that, or at least not as much JavaScript. Offline API, which I love, because that finally gives us the ability with web applications to operate in conditions where the network access may be unpredictable. Or things like web workers, which allow us to have multi-threaded applications, or basically threads in JavaScript to go do heavy work on the client. Very cool technologies, but these are the things that are a little bit more nascent. They exist in some browsers, but the standard isn't quite settled enough to exist in all, and certainly not settled enough to exist in all the same way. So the interoperability of these in-progress features is a little bit rougher. So we're not going to focus as much on those because you are developers that need to get stuff done. So we're going to show you what you can use to do that. It's also worth highlighting Microsoft's approach here with IE9. Obviously, there's a lot of talk today about the different browsers. This is really a fun time to be a developer because this is a browser renaissance. All the browsers are starting to evolve very quickly again, and IE9 is taking a bit of a different approach than some of the other browsers out there. In fact, IE9 offers support for the most relevant real-world web patterns that developers are using today, as well as the HTML5 patterns we expect to become more mainstream. This, the corporate VP of IE, the guy at the top of IE. So what is this basically saying? It's basically saying that Microsoft is going to get behind those things in that stable category, those things that have bubbled out of that cloud to be a little bit more well-defined, so the things that they put into IE, the things that actually ship, are the things that are more stable, the things that are ready to go. So that's Microsoft's approach to IE9, and we'll look at that today, and everything we do today will be IE9 compatible. However, Microsoft's not ignoring the other things. They're not saying just because it's not completely ready, we're not going to do it. But unlike, let's say, a Chrome browser, which might build a more experimental feature right into the next beta, which betas ship, every 6 weeks now, Microsoft is going about it in a little bit more defined way. So they've got something called the HTML5 labs, where they're putting up their more experimental implementations for things like WebSockets. So WebSockets, another very popular or fun HTML5 technology for TCP communication between browsers and servers. Microsoft's giving you a playground where you can add this, experiment with this in IE, but they're not going to bake it in until it's a little bit more defined. So I highlight that only so you're aware of how IE is evolving relative to the other browsers. I would say that pretty much universally, Chrome and Firefox, in fact, Firefox is about to get on the same very fast iterative cycle that Chrome's been on for a while. They're going more about putting these experimental things right into the browser as soon as they're ready, and then just changing them in the browser as they evolve. So different strategies, both, though, driving towards the future. So that's HTML. That's how HTML is evolving. On the other side of the same coin is CSS. Now, while both are coming out of the standards bodies, CSS is a little bit more definitively within the W3C. HTML5 is being evolved by a number of different committees that have different opinions, but we can more narrowly look at CSS3 through the W3C lens. And what I have on the screen here is what the W3C defines the different stages of what we consider standards. And you may have seen these acronyms before. From the left we have, or your left, working draft, last call for comment, CR is almost ready. That's call, what is that? That's, I forget, it doesn't really matter. It means almost ready. Then PR, and then rec is the last one. That's the recommendation. Now, the important thing to notice here is that the final stage, recommendation, that doesn't mean rule. It doesn't mean you have to do it this way. So the most power that a standards body has is to recommend. Maybe recommend strongly, but nonetheless recommend. The people that actually set the rules are the people that build and ship the browsers. So a bit of this is academic. So when we talk about CSS3, what can we use here today? Where do these things get classified? So what I've thrown up here on the screen are some of the more popular CSS technologies we tend to talk about and where they're at in their current draft status. And we can see that CSS2, that's in recommended status. That's good. That means that CSS that we're using today is a draft we can depend on. But notice that in the next category, CSS 2.1 actually still lives in that state. It does not live in the finalized state for standard, yet we all use CSS 2.1. Why do I highlight this? Standards tend to evolve at a bit slower pace than sometimes we prefer. However, that doesn't really matter. What matters to you as a developer, what should matter to you as a developer, is where can I actually use it in the browsers? And that's really what we want to look at today. You'll also notice in that second category, we have things like CSS selectors and CSS color. These aren't the sexiest features in CSS3, but they're very useful to you as developers. So we'll look at them today. And then we have backgrounds and borders. This is drop shadows, rounded corners. We have media queries, which are great for targeting different form factors. And we even have things like multi-column support. You may have heard of a few other things, though, coming in CSS3. Maybe CSS animations, transitions, gradients, all these fun things. All of those still live in working draft. So when it comes to strategy, be aware that if you're finding these things in browsers today, they're putting them in a very early state. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it just means that these things are a little bit less definitively settled than the others we'll look at today. As a result, as CSS evolves, what the standards body has done is they've given browsers a way to say, all right, you want to implement something early, just don't use a property name that may eventually become a standard. So how many of you were web developers back in the first browser war with Netscape and IE and that evolutionary period? A little bit painful. We know what happened there, where we had two tags, the exact same name that did two different things. And the modern standards body said, you know, we don't want to have that again. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you proprietary browser prefixes. And what this means is that this prefix, you're basically free to do whatever you want with it. This is your browser implementation's sandbox. And this will allow you to more quickly evolve until the standard is ready, at which point, hopefully, you'll implement the final standard property. Now, I put these examples up here because notice what we see on the screen. We have dash Moz, dash border, dash radius. This is rounded corners for Firefox. We have dash WebKit, dash border, dash radius. This is rounded corners for Safari, Chrome, iOS, Android, anything that's based on the WebKit browser platform. And then we have border dash radius. the standard. So this is where everything should eventually arrive. I've ordered these in a very specific way. What does CSS stand for? Cascading style sheets. So what rule wins? The last rule the browser understands. So if you structure your prefix tags in this way, when a modern browser recognizes the standard, that's the one it will stop on. If you get this order the reverse, or you do this the other way around, your browser implementation or your website implementation will very likely be using the proprietary prefix, which is not a good long-term solution for your site. Will it work? Yes, but that's not what you want to have ideally. You also notice that this creates a bit of glut inside of our CSS. If we want to have a feature like this, we end up doing the same line like 3 or 4 times just to achieve one feature. And we'll look at today a way you can get around that, or a way you can actually save yourself some coding with a technique that exists for CSS. The prefixes you should be aware of, I put some of them up there. WebKit, we talked about. Moz, -O, any guesses? Opera. I'm sure the guesses are running through your head early in the morning. And -MS. There is a -MS as well for the Microsoft browsers. There are some properties that use this, but you don't see it as often. And as I mentioned, this is the standard way for browsers to do proprietary features as they evolve. Make sense? Perfect. So Microsoft's approach again then here is to really focus on things that are at this state or forward. They're not trying to focus as much on the working draft state items, though if you look at IE 10 preview, which is out and available, you'll find that Microsoft is now looking at some of the things in working draft state and implementing them into the next version of IE as well. So you had that strategy. So then the last thing to talk about before we actually get into spending a lot of time in demos is what actually is usable today, or more importantly, how do I define, and thus you define, what is usable? Because this can mean different things to different people. So as it turns out, there are a few different strategies for defining what actually is usable. The first strategy is the lowest common denominator approach. Only use features that are available in all target browsers. So this is kind of like saying, I'm not going to use anything new until all the browsers support it. So in this case, we have a matrix of the various browsers that you might be targeting. And I have just an ambiguous matrix of features that they may or may not support. It really doesn't matter what this is. And the only features I might target in the lowest common denominator approach are that top bar of features, the ones that are in all browsers. Unfortunately, with this strategy, what this tends to mean in today's development is that you're not going to be adopting much new stuff. Because there's not much that's in the world today in HTML5 and CS3 that falls into this, everybody has it. Not because the modern browsers don't have it, but because there's a broad deployment of older versions of those browsers. And we can't do anything about that. So this becomes a difficult strategy, but if you want to use it, it means you're going to be using older HTML features. So there's another pretty good strategy, though, to get around that. This strategy is, and I'll let it come up on the screen for you, polyfill enriched. I'll explain what polyfill means in just a moment, or we'll kind of talk about it here as we go. But in this case, we're not only going to target browsers that have common features, but we're going to use something to fill in, JavaScript, Flash, whatever it may be, to fill in features that don't exist. So now my matrix, maybe I can fill in some of these boxes for browsers that don't have a feature natively, and now my box of what I can target becomes a little bit bigger. And you'll find that this is a very common technique today for adopting HTML5 and CSS3. In fact, a lot of what we look at today will talk about these so-called polyfills. Add this to your vocabulary. This is a new important term for the evolution of the web. Polyfill is a term that's only recently really been coined, and it's essentially just a fancy way, or a short, concise way, of saying anything that's JavaScript that implants HTML5 functionality in a browser that doesn't natively support it. How is this different than just adding your own magic features to browsers with JavaScript? The key difference to a polyfill is that you're not defining a new API. You're simply filling in behind the standard HTML5 API the technology you need. So a good polyfill should allow you to write HTML5 once that runs in the modern browsers, and through the simple inclusion of some JavaScript, automatically allow that HTML5 that you wrote to run in browsers that don't support it natively. If you're targeting a new API, that becomes something a little bit different, and we'll look at a lot of these today for supporting new features. And one of the last adoption strategies, or I think we basically two more, one is alternate experiences, or one of the last is alternate experiences. And in this case, we basically acknowledge, and this is a fact of the web, that not every browser can do the same things. So we're going to target browser features, we're going to polyfill those that we can, but then we're just going to say, you know, either not worth the effort or it's just not possible to make it look exactly the same in all browsers. And IE6 is often a good example here because some things are just very difficult to do, or if not impossible to do, in a browser that was created over a decade ago. So in this case, we can still expand that box. We can still say we're targeting more features or at least more scenarios. But to do this successfully, we have to put on our designer hat. So a brief segue into some design concepts you as modern web developers should internalize. Progressive enhancement, graceful degradation. Two sides to a very similar coin. Let's start with progressive enhancement. This is a cheese pizza. It's a great pizza. On its own, a cheese pizza conveys to just about anybody who has it the essence of pizza. It's good, it's round, it's hot, it's warm, it's everything people like about pizza. It's a great core experience. However, as you have more resources, you may choose to enrich your pizza a bit. You may put hamburgers on for your topping. You may make hot dogs your crust. This is progressively enhanced pizza. Maybe too much progressively enhanced. You can gild the lily. You can go too far. But the idea of progressive enhancement is designed for a great core, lowest common denominator experience. I have dough, sauce, and cheese. I want to make that experience great. Now, as I have more resources, as I have more ingredients, I'll enrich, progressively enhance the pizza for the scenarios where I have those resources available. Start designing for the core experience, enrich as resources are available. The flip side to that is graceful degradation. Mercedes sets out to design a new flagship sedan. They don't start out by designing their $30,000 entry C-Class. They don't say, all right, let's figure out what the budget car is going to be that we're going to create. Let's make sure we shave some corners, make sure it's affordable. And once we've got that set, let's just slap some chrome on. Let's put a little more wood here and there, and then just sort of upgrade it to be our $120,000 flagship version. No. When Mercedes sets out to design a new flagship, they start by saying, clear the board. What can we do? Sky's the limit. Let's find the best materials. Let's do the best engineering, the best that we can do now, and set our premium experience. So when the resources are available, in this case, a lot of money, when the resources are available, we can deliver a premium experience that targets users that are ready for that. In this case, users are drivers. But we recognize that not everybody has $120,000 for a car, so let's gracefully degrade from our premium experience into something that still conveys the essence of that sedan, but is more accessible to everyone. So graceful degradation then is designed for the premium first, and then take away from that to produce a usable experience, something that still conveys the essence of the original, but targets a broader audience. So in your websites, it should be very clear. Progressive enhancement, start designing for the lowest common denominator, older browsers, and add features for the newer browsers. Or graceful degradation, design for the newest browsers first, and then go to the old browsers and figure out what you have to take away to still have an usable experience. Both approaches are valid. It's up to you to decide which way is right for your users, but it's a design concept you must internalize to adopt HTML5 and CSS3. There's no other way. The final adoption strategy, and then we're into demos, is vertical targeting. And this is very popular today for a really important reason. I noticed some of that reason drifting throughout the audience this morning. Vertical targeting basically says, we know because of either what our app is or who our users are that we don't really have to think about all these other browsers. We can target one sliver of the browser spectrum. Maybe I'm in a corporate environment. I know all of my users are on IE. In fact, if all of your users are on IE6, this really probably isn't going to be the best talk for you because you're facing an uphill battle for HTML5. However, if you're on the much improved IE9, you can target that sliver, and then you can just focus on what's available in that browser and don't worry about what the other browsers do or don't support. I don't recommend this if you're targeting browsers. This is not a good strategy for browser targeting. However, this is a perfect strategy and an increasingly common strategy for mobile, for devices. Because what we'll find today is that devices, iPads, iPhones, Androids, Windows phones with the next update, are very fertile ground for lots of the modern HTML5, CSS3 things. Because why? There aren't a broad deployment of legacy devices that have old browsers. Pretty much all devices out there have new browsers, so we can universally target these features to that environment. So even if you don't want to risk putting this out on the web where some users may not have the browsers to do it, targeting mobile with HTML5 is an excellent use case for what we're going to look at today. And actually, in some cases, it's easier. So with that being our foundation, now let's jump in and look at techniques for HTML5 and for CSS3. And we've got about 12 techniques that we can look at. Based on time, we usually don't cover them all, but I'm going to show you a resource where you can play with these afterwards, and we'll focus on some of the best ones today so that you can use them. And we're going to switch over now to our demo machine, and it's locked up on us here, so let me switch over now. So back over here, our wonderful IE6 Flying Star demo. Let me go ahead and get rid of this. First thing that I've got up here is a site that I've created recently called HTML5.com. This is a site where I'm putting resources expressly around the idea of things that you can do with HTML5 and CSS3, so it's a general resource site, as well as creating demos that show you how you can use features across browsers today. So not only for the new browsers, but for the older browsers as well. In fact, we'll be using this today, the demo section of the site, to look at a lot of these things, but anything we don't cover today, you'll be able to come and grab from this site. Now, the site here serves as a good starting point. There's a lot of HTML5 and CSS3 on this site. We've got rounded corners, we've got drop shadows, we've got some of the new background things going on here. All of this that you see in the browser right now, including this rotation, it's got a little animation in there, the little drop shadows that make it look like it's coming off the page. All of this is HTML5 and CSS3. None of this is images. None of this is JavaScript. This is IE9. This is Chrome. This is Firefox without the page. This is Firefox. Looks the same across all three. I really didn't have to work hard to do that. I did this in about 4 hours, the design of this, because the browsers now give us the ability to really unlock our imagination. We can now do these things without the need to go doing a lot of Photoshop chopping and weird image background things. The browsers give us the ability to do this. Well, what happens, though, if we pop this open in IE6? There's the same site now in IE6. Now, I haven't perfected this. Like I said, I didn't spend a lot of time on it yet, so we don't have our big center banner up here. But what do you see? What did we talk about? This is gracefully degraded. We still get the same core experience. It's still usable, but maybe I don't have all the fancy drop shadows and things like that. Frankly, for you as a web designer, that should be okay, because with a decade-old browser, the web is starting to feel a little bit less rich. Go to any modern website, and IE6 and older browsers in general are getting degraded experiences, but usable experiences. So I put this up here to emphasize that even though we're looking at some things that may not run in IE6, they're still going to be degrading to a very useful state. So let's jump into some of the actual features we want to look at. I'm going to bring up Visual Studio here, and I'll set the stage so we know what we're going to talk about. First thing, if you're using, well, let me ask, how many people in here are using Visual Studio 2008 or 2010? Get those arms again. So that's like the entire room. Perfect. So 100% of you. If you're using either of those environments, you want to enrich your IDE, you want to enrich your text editor to recognize your HTML5 tags so it doesn't give you those little red squigglies. So if you don't have SP1 of VS 2010 installed, then you can go to either of these bit.ly links, bit.ly/VS HTML5 or bit.ly/VS SVG for SVG support as well. And this will bring in the language, the definitions for your text editor so that it recognizes and gives you some IntelliSense around HTML5. If you have VS 2010 SP1, this is in the box automatically, so you're in good shape. For older browsers, as we go through this today, we're going to be talking about 3 techniques, and I'll tell you which one we're going to focus on most. You really have 3 options. You can shiv an older browser, and this is really in the polyfill sense, not in the prison sense, so we're not going to be killing anybody, but essentially a shiv is transparent to users. This is a polyfill. So our goal with a shiv is to make an older browser be on par with a newer browser so the user really never knows the difference. We can kill an older browser, which basically means this is where we throw up a full stop. We say, your browser is old, we're not supporting you. I don't really like that. I'm sure you've been to some websites that do that. You've been equally frustrated, basically saying, come on, just give me something. Don't give me a full stop. But in some cases, again, depending on the app, this is something you can do, and certainly it's one of the easier things to do. Or you can target a browser. And in this case, rather than trying to make all browsers behave the same, we targeted our experiences to different classes of browsers. So maybe we have our premium experience and then maybe our older browser experience. We're going to focus mostly on trying to make the browsers on par as much as we can, or presenting an usable targeted experience for those browsers. One of the tools that's going to help you do that right out of the box is Modernizer. Modernizer is an open source, free JavaScript file, something you just drop in your projects. And what this allows you to do is very easily check for available features, not only in HTML, but also in CSS. And we'll take a look at how this works. But this is an essential tool for adopting HTML5 and CSS3. Why? What did I say about HTML5 when we started? It's an umbrella term. So what does that mean about its features? They're largely independent, which means you don't test a browser to say, is this browser HTML5 compatible? You test to say, is this feature available? And Modernizer gives you an API to easily do that for all of the HTML5 features and CSS features you may want. And as a result, you don't have to write the code to do that. So let's check out Modernizer and see how this is going to help you in the process. In fact, as we do that, I'm also going to go ahead and set the stage here so we can do both of these. Well, I was, but this will be easier so you guys can keep up. So I'm in Visual Studio 2010 here, and I've got a very standard, a very simple HTML page so we can follow along. We've got some HTML4 style HTML right now. You can see I've got div ID equals header, I've got div ID equals nav, div ID equals content, div ID equals footer. This should probably look familiar, even though none of the content is there. This is largely how we do layout in websites today. A lot of divs and a lot of IDs hiding that semantic value within our divs. Now, if I run this page today, it's going to look familiar, so let me just go ahead and show you that what we're starting with. I'll view this in the browser. And I think we get it up here. Let me try it again. View in browser, and we'll load it up. Well, we were loading it up before, so while it's loading, we'll go ahead and then talk about what we can do next. Modernizer. Modernizer is a one-script thing. We drop a script on, and it's going to do something to our website. So let's check out how that works. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to add to my head section of my file. This does have to be in the head section because you need this API before the page is finished loading. I'm going to come add a script reference. I'm going to say script, and then I'm going to say source equals, and I've got the Modernizer script in my JavaScript, or in my scripts folder in my project. So if I zoom in here, you can see in my scripts folder I have this Modernizer file. The current version is 1.7. I've got the minified version so that its performance will be ideal on my website. And I'll come in here and say source equals scripts / modernizer-1.7.min.js. I don't have to put type equals text / JavaScript. That's something that, for better or worse, that we've done for a long time. It's really not essential anymore because there really is no other kind of script type we include in browsers. So as HTML5 has evolved, this is one of the things that's changed with it. You can validly do this without including text or script / JavaScript. So we've got this in here now. Now let's see if we can get this page to run for us, and we really would like this to run. So we'll go ahead and view in browser at this time. And let's go ahead and try this a different approach since it doesn't like that. We'll try browse with. Let's see if we can get it in a different browser. OK. So here's my site running. It's, like I said, very basic HTML5. In fact, if we were to look at the source, view page source, which I will do here, there's our simple HTML5 markup. Or not HTML5 markup, our script. But notice there's nothing different about this page yet. It looks just like it did at design time. What's Modernizer doing? What does view source show you? Shows you the state of the HTML as it was sent from the server. How do we figure out what it looks like actually in the client? Well, there are tools for that. In Chrome, there are the Chrome or WebKit developer tools, and I can hit Control-Shift-I to bring these up, or F12. And in this, I can click on the Elements tab, and this is showing me the actual HTML as it exists right now. And if I expand this, we can find that's not my HTML. Let's get, because we're on the View Source tab. I was like, that's not right. Here we go. Get on the right tab. Now what do we see? In that HTML head section, let me zoom in here. In my HTML tag, we see a lot of little classes have been added to the actual HTML tag. What are those saying? Those are saying things like no-touch, geolocation, post message, WebSQL, WebGL. What do these sound like? These are HTML5 features, right? Where are these existing right now? In my top level element, in my HTML element, as different class names. So what Modernizer does is it looks at your browser, it determines what features it can do, and then it renders CSS classes at the root level element with a no-dash feature name if it's not supported, or just a feature name if it is. What does that let us do? Well, let's find out. So let's go back to our simple page in Visual Studio. Let me zoom out so you guys don't get seasick. And in here, let's just create a simple style. Let's go ahead and say, let's create a class name here, Canvas. And we'll go ahead and give this just a display block. And let's create another class name .no-canvas. So this is one of the HTML5 features we'll look at today. And we'll give this display none. So we're simply going to show something if Canvas is there, theoretically, and not show it if Canvas is not available. Now inside of our page, we just need to use this. So let me come in here and simply create an element that has our class. So let's say I've got some pair programming here. You don't like the way I spell display? That is HTML5 spelling. I was going to remove all of the consonants, but I figured that would be a little bit more difficult to read. So thank you guys for being my pair programmers here. So we'll say div, and then we'll just say class equals, and for completeness, so we can validate that this is working, let's just say no canvas. And then inside of this, let's just put a simple message. So hello. So now when we run this, if canvas is not available, we should not see this message. There are different ways you can do this. So I'm doing it one way. You could obviously have the inverse of this rule be true. You could say if no canvas exists, then I want to show that. So what should happen here, I'm trying to think if this is going to achieve what we want. Do this a different way. Let's just say display block for this. This will be a little bit more fun. So we'll say display block after you guys have corrected me, not blocks. We'll load this in Chrome. We'll refresh the site, get rid of the magnifier. Hello shows up. Should hello show up? What do we see in our top settled settings? We see okay. We see the class here. We see the canvas class in our HTML, right? So right there, the third one down, we see canvas. What does that mean? How do styles cascade? They cascade by layering on. So anything now in my style sheet inside of Visual Studio could be .canvas .something. So now I could say maybe whatever my property name is, my property, and this would now cascade. So they could do different things. So .canvas .my property could be where we do the display. So we could call this my class. And no canvas .my class could do something different. So now if I go back down here and rename my class on my element to my class, get my typing in there, my class, now the styles will cascade. So depending on whether canvas is enabled or not will impact which style we see on our page. Modernizer gives you this for CSS, and it gives you a full JavaScript API for everything else. In fact, in Chrome or even in IE with IE's tools as well, if you look over here on the Scripts tab, I've set up a watch expression for Modernizer, and I'll zoom in on this for you. Here's where you can explore the API if you just want to check it out. You notice we see a lot of things like CSS columns true, CSS transforms true. These are just the Boolean properties that Modernizer exposes that you can easily check in your own JavaScript to determine if that feature is available for you to use. This is a complete API for checking features. It's a universal tool for helping you adopt HTML5 and CSS3. So leave it at that because it's not a true feature, but it's something that's going to help you with your adoption. What we really want to look at, though, here are the features. And the first one we want to look at, so we can start improving our markup, is semantic tags. This is one of the things that you can absolutely use today, and semantic tags are essentially tags with meaning. We saw in our example there that I had a bunch of divs, and I had a bunch of IDs with values. Those values have meaning, or they at least do to most people. ID equals header means the top part of my page where there's some sort of masthead usually. ID equals footer usually means where I'm having links to maybe sitemaps or other things within my page. But accessible screen readers, SEO robots, all these things are not allowed to extract semantic value from attributes. And an ID is an attribute. However, if we can put that meaning into our tags, then we can improve that meaning. We can convey more clearly to machines what our page contains. So here we have two examples. Our HTML4 markup on the left, which we looked at, and a way we can start doing it with HTML5. Instead of using div ID equals header, we can use the new header tag. Instead of doing div ID equals footer, we can use the new footer tag. Now, fortunately, this works completely across all browsers because one of the nice things about HTML5 is it's backwards compatible. Even if a feature is not supported, browsers will not die. We don't want to hurt browsers. So let's evolve our page as we're going to do throughout today. So back in my demo here, we've got our HTML4 content. Let's improve this. So instead of doing div ID equals header, why don't we change this out to be just an actual header tag? So I'll just go ahead and clear out everything except header. So now we're going to use a little HTML5 here. Let me go ahead and make the closing tag here as we've got a little Visual Studio hiccup. And instead of doing div ID equals nav, there's a new nav tag as well. So why don't we do something similar here? Let's make this div ID equals nav. And we might have some sort of navigation structure in here typically. And then just for the sake of time and brevity, let's go ahead and just make this div footer just a closing footer tag. So we've got some HTML5. Another cool thing about HTML5, you guys should also do this from now on. Anybody think that they could tell me this from memory, this doc type at the top of the page? I know you can't read it because it's small at the top, but anybody ever write this out by hand? No, we all copy and paste. Oh, we do? Well, we have some geniuses among us. Congratulations to you. If I had a prize, I would give it to you because that's impressive. But this is very difficult for most of us to do. So HTML5 introduces a new doc type of simply HTML. You can use this today. It's fully backwards compatible. Broad websites are using it, and we can remember it. How many of you have put pages out or have pages out now with no doc type? You just think that line is worthless and just delete it. Good. We actually have a room of web developers. If you don't put this on there, if you delete your doc type or you get the wrong doc type out there, you can trigger in a browser what's known as quirks mode. Quirks mode could otherwise be defined as bugs mode. Bugs mode otherwise is known as rendering your page as if it's 1995. So if you want to do these things and not have an inconsistent experience, make sure you have a doc type. And because it's easy, just do doc type HTML. So we've got that set up. Let's check our page out in the browsers and see what's happening. So I'm going to go back over here to Chrome. Let's reload this. OK, I've got my site. That works. My style went away. Well, we'll fix that in a minute. So that's OK. Let's make sure we've got the right source. View page source. All right, it's actually our HTML5. There's no magic caching going on here. We see our new tags, header and footer. Let's check this out in some other browsers, see where we're at right now. Let me grab this. And let's go into IE here and IE9 load this up. So here's my content here. OK, it looks good here. It's running here. How about IE6? Let's see what our condition is there, if IE6 is participating. I've got a couple ways to do IE6. I'll tell you about both. One is running on a Windows XP virtual machine, and then I've just got it in something of a Unity mode here. The other is using something from a company called Spoon. Spoon is a virtualization company that allows you to basically harvest your IE6 into a virtualized environment, so it's easy to just pop up for quick testing like we're doing here. So I'm just going to use that right now to do our testing. So I load my content up here. This is my HTML5 content, right? So if I right-click on this, view source, this is HTML5. So what do you learn right here? Semantic tags don't crash older browsers. Older browsers, when they encounter tags they don't recognize, just treat them like base-level objects, kind of like divs, with one little exception that we need to fix so you guys can use this universally. I mentioned that our style isn't working. Let's go back to Visual Studio. The style isn't working because we were previously targeting our style at an element with the ID header. Now we're actually just using an element called header. So we can get rid of that hashtag in front of our header style name. So now we're applying a class level style or an element level style. And when we go and reload our page, we'll start with a modern browser here. And we'll refresh this here, get the magnifying glass out of the way. Sure, close the program. That's what I want to do anyway. Refresh this. There's my blue background. So we're styling an HTML5 element. But however, when we go to an older browser here, like IE6, and reload this, we can see that my styling doesn't work quite the same way. Now, it is working. Now, why is it working? Because by default, your style actually won't work in a browser like IE6. IE has a little trick that requires you to do some magic. The reason it's working at all today is because of Modernizer. Modernizer not only gives you an API for checking these things, it also does a little bit of JavaScript polyfilling for you to trigger things like the new semantic tags in older browsers. In fact, all that it has to do to make this happen is a single line of JavaScript inside of Visual Studio to make older tags or new tags work in the older versions of IE. All you have to do inside of a script, I recognize that's wrong, is come in here and say document.createElement, create element. Visual Studio will catch up on us here. And then let's say a new element header. By just doing this in memory, not assigning it to anything, this triggers a rendering mode in older versions of IE that allows you to apply styles to your older tags. So you could do this on your own for every tag to enable those stylings, but something like Modernizer is going to do that for you. So there's an added benefit of using Modernizer, but if you don't want to go that Modernizer route, you can do this manually. This triggers the ability for your styles to apply to those new semantic tags, and you can use now your styling, your semantic tags across all browsers. In fact, where did we start today? We started by showing you HTML UI, HTML UI.com. I told you that this is a lot of a lot of HTML5, and if we were to view the source on this page, view source, you'd notice that all the tags in here are HTML5 tags, the header tag, the nav tag, the section tag. But all of it's being rendered, and all of my styles are being applied inside of IE6. So this should give you that validation. These are tags you can use today and successfully target all browsers. Fair enough? One thing you can at least use today. Let's see if there are others, some things maybe a little bit more sexy than that as well. So the next thing that you might check out, video and audio. This comes up quite often. Video and audio is a fun area of discussion because there's usually a lot of confusion around this, but it's actually not as confusing as it's made out to be. What it really comes down to in video audio are the things called containers, which are basically file names, the things you recognize as file extensions. And there are codecs, and this is basically the impression technique used inside of those containers. While there are lots of options out there, lots of different competing containers and codecs, there's one that really gives you the best ability to universally deploy video today, and that's MP4 H.264. Why? Not all browsers natively support this, but it's the one format that spans HTML5, Silverlight, and Flash. So it's that sweet spot where you can encode a video once, and you can target all desktop devices using a plugin, and all mobile devices, or broadly today, all mobile devices using their native HTML5 support. So at Telerik, where we have lots of video, this is what we do today. Rather than maintaining multiple encodings of a video, which is also an option, we maintain one encoding, and we can reach everybody by having this format. So to use HTML5 video, let's take a look at how that actually works. I have a website here with some of our demos. This is in a tool from Microsoft called Web Matrix. Web Matrix is a free tool from Microsoft. It's just an alternative way of building websites. I sometimes prefer it for doing simple website work like we're doing today. And I'm going to open up a page first for you, and then we'll take a look at some of the code for it. I'll come back over here to our website, and let's go to our demos. These are things that you guys can access online afterwards as well. And we'll go to audio video. And I have a little video here. I've got a 4-month-old daughter at home, so she makes it really easy to prepare for things like this. But I've got a video embedded in this page. And this page is using nothing but pure HTML5. In fact, if I right-click View Source on this, we can see that there's no object embed tag. The only thing on this page, if I zoom in here for you guys, is video with a width, a height, a keyword called controls, which triggers the browser's provided controls for my video, and then a specified source. And that's pointing to my local video file. By having just this within my page, I should be able to play this video. So let's see if this works. This is IE9, so this is showing off IE9's native video support. And yeah, it works. And the video is fun. Now, one cool thing about IE9, HTML5 video support, I found out you can right-click, go to play speed. You can slow this down a bit. And this has an interesting effect on a baby's laugh. Let's go back to where that is. Well, maybe the audio won't come through. Oh, the audio is muted. You can come here and have some fun. This is native stuff from HTML5, though. So HTML5 is providing the controls. HTML5 is providing everything here. All I had to do is provide my video file, and it works. Whoa. Exactly. That's where the scatterbrain comes from. So where else would this work right now? This would work on an iPad. This would work on an iPhone. This would work on Android. So right away, I've extended my reach to devices, and that's huge for video. Where will I have trouble with this, though? Actually, in more places than you might think, and let's be very honest about the current state of HTML5. So if I go over to Chrome, this is going to work, but it's only because I've got Microsoft-provided codecs to play this, because Chrome removed support for native H.264 and MP4 in the latest versions of Chrome. If I go to Firefox, that's a good example. Go to the same page. Close this for now. You can see I just get a big X. It actually can't play it at all because Firefox doesn't support MP4 H.264. There's a lot of reasons for that. We won't get into them today. So we need a better solution to broadly support this, because obviously it's not going to work today in IE6 either. So what can we do? We can use the useful ability of HTML to fall back on different things. So if we go back to our original demo here, or let's do it in IE9. The universal demo shows us a technique where we can use a plugin in the browser. So now my experience is loaded up using Silverlight, and we can have our video play here. But in devices that don't support HTML5 video playback, so let's go to Firefox, go to our universal page. Now my one video file is the same video file as playing back in Firefox, and if we were to go all the way to IE6 as well, the same video would play back in IE6. Well, this version of IE6 doesn't have the Silverlight plugin installed, but with Silverlight plugin installed, the video would play in IE6 too. So one simple fallback gives you broad support for browsers. What does that fallback look like? How difficult is it to implement? It's actually incredibly easy. So to show you the source here for video, we'll go to our universal page. Instead of just doing the video tag, we do something a little bit different. And I'll zoom in so you guys can see this easily. We still see our video tag. It's right here, video, and there's my controls, that stuff we saw before. But now it's inside of an object tag. So the object tag has my Silverlight player. It's going to be my first experience. It's going to be my premium experience. But then if Silverlight's not available, how does HTML behave with controls that have behavior? If it can't do what the outer control does, so if it can't play back a Silverlight object, or if it can't play back HTML5 video, it renders what's in between. So it's going to fall back, in this case, on my HTML5 video tag when Silverlight's not available. In fact, to prove that, we go to IE9, and I'll zoom out here for you. Inside of IE9, there's the ability to turn off plugins, so we come in over here to our Internet options. We go over to our Programs, Manage Add-ons, and find Silverlight. And we could disable this and close that. Okay. And now when we reload the page that has our Silverlight player, the video still comes back, but now it's just automatically coming back with the HTML5 player. So you get that seamless fallback for users regardless of what technology they have. So this is how you can adopt video today using HTML5 and the little polyfill from a plugin to broadly target all users. Make sense? Good. So the next thing we want to talk about then, and the next one I think is pretty fun, geolocation. So geolocation gives you the ability to know where in the world are your users. It's actually broadly supported on all modern browsers today, including IE9, Chrome, Firefox, and especially on mobile devices. A very simple API, navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition, that goes to the browser, asks the browser to ask the user, you, would you let me give to this website your current location? If you approve it, the opt-in nature of this, then you get the coordinates of the user that you can then do whatever you want with inside of your code. So I'll show you that this works, but the thing to remember here is that this doesn't exist in older browsers. So how do we use this universally? I told you that today's session is about techniques you can use today. Well, the primary way you can use geolocation universally is use this for modern browsers. And then if your scenario allows you to still provide location or to provide location services when it's not as accurate, you can use somebody's IP address to figure out where they are broadly and provide a less fine level of detail of location. So let me show you you can do this with some simple scripting. So back over on our demo machine here, we'll go to a different demo that you guys will be able to check out as well, and this will be for geolocation. So I've got a page here. I have a button that says Show My Time Zone. I click this. I see a little message come up here at the bottom. This is IE9. The website would like to track your physical location. Do you want to allow this? Every browser does this a little bit differently, but the idea is still the same. I have to let the browser do this in order for it to take my location. I'll say, sure, go ahead. So that gives it my location, and that then displays the result. Let me zoom in so you guys can see it a little bit more easily. So that's my exact longitude, latitude as determined by my computer. That's the degree of accuracy, which doesn't look very accurate today. And then it's telling me my time zone. Now, how am I getting time zone? I'm using a web service where I'm sending off my lat long, and based on that, it's sending back to me my time zone. But you can do anything you want once you have these lat long coordinates. Now, as I mentioned, the API for this is really dead simple. In fact, we can view the source for this to see what's happening. When you click that button, all I'm doing is firing off get location JavaScript here. That get location is firing off and getting the position from the browser and then making a request using jQuery out to some web service that's going to send back my time zone information based on my current location. 3 lines of code, essentially, to make this happen, and I can take location and do something fun. So this works in all modern browsers, but this doesn't work, obviously, in an older browser like IE, or IE6. So how do we make this support universal? Now if I click Show My Time Zone, for a modern browser like IE9 or Chrome, I'm going to still get back the thing based on what my browser, what my computer can determine where I am. Now, I don't have GPS here, so this is being based on Wi-Fi. But if I go to an older browser like IE6, and I think we've got a responsive IE6 now. I think our little VM with IE is having hiccups, which is why we're not seeing it as clearly. So I apologize for that. Let's see if we can get it up in the isolated. So let's go to our universal demo in our isolated IE6. Drop it in here. So now we're definitely running in an older version or older browser that doesn't know anything about geolocation. Show my time zone. Something still comes back. In fact, it still gets my time zone right. It says I'm in the Eastern time zone, just a little bit different way. It also is showing me my IP address. Now, you can't get IP addresses from JavaScript. JavaScript does not have a way to natively grab an IP address. So the techniques for this are either to render that IP address into your page server side, so it's available to the page if it needs it, because that server request will know the requesting IP. Or in this example, we're actually using a second web service that will, in JavaScript, give you that IP address. So the code's out here for you guys to explore, but what makes this work is right here. We go to jasonip.appspot.com. That sends us back the IP address of wherever we're making this web service call from, so I can do all of this completely client-side, get the IP address, and use that to determine my actual location. So web services, IP addresses, geolocation, you can use it across all browsers. For newer browsers, it will be more accurate. For older browsers, if you still want to have geo support, it'll be just a little less accurate. If you don't want less accurate information, you can always put up an alternate experience and just not have your geo features in older browsers. The number one spot where geo features show up today, devices. Devices universally today have GPS. They're the most accurate, and you can do the most with location there. Things like Foursquare and all the check-in things that are very popular today. So local storage and HTML5 forms and SVG and Canvas. Those are three more things we can talk about for HTML5, and I'll show you one of them, but I want to also make sure that we look at some of the CSS3 things today as well. Each of these things requires you to use a bit of polyfilling. In fact, if we were to start on the first that I showed you here, local storage, this is available in all modern browsers today. This is like cookies on steroids to a certain degree. What is one thing, though, that is true about cookies? Very good. They go back and forth with every request. So anything you put into a cookie travels back and forth on every request, including those fancy AJAX requests. So if you're loading up your cookies to capacity, you're really hurting your performance. Not to mention they have a pretty tight limit anyway. You can't put a lot in there. Local storage gives you a way to store something client-side up to 5 megs. That's the current de facto limit that's being put into browsers by using a very simple API, either sessionstorage.setItem or localstorage.setItem. Session storage values live for the current session, which means the current window. Open a new window, that value is no longer there. Close the browser, reopen it, that value is no longer there. Local storage persists. Put something in local storage, open a new window, the value is there. Open the browser again, the value is still there. So local storage is more persistent than session storage. To use this universally, you need to use a little JavaScript polyfill. As it turns out, older browsers have techniques that, when used properly, can simulate local storage. So there's a polyfill called amplify.js. Amplify.js is an open source JavaScript solution that gives you an API for doing local storage across all browsers and browser versions. So that's your polyfill for this. So to show you this in action, we'll jump over to our demo laptop again. In fact, I'm going to show you guys a place where you can check out a lot of these things. There's a website that you guys will find very useful, HTML5 demos. Do it this way. .com. This has a number of the various HTML5 features that we're talking about today, like Canvas and video, like the local storage things, and it shows you, using simple icons, where are these available today, and gives you simple demos to check them out. So in the case of local storage, you can come find their storage demos. You can see that they validate this is cross-browser. I can put something in here like TechEd, and then if I were to reload this page, we'll go ahead and do that, values are not, or the values now show up in the text boxes above, so you can see the values have been shifted up to those labels. Both values are there, session and local. But if I were to open this up in a new tab, so that's going to create a new session, go across here, paste that in. When this loads, now you can see that the only value that remains is my local storage value. My session storage value is empty. So this gives you a sandbox you can work with. This works in IE9, which is where we are right now. It works across all modern browsers, and then through that simple amplify script, which you can see in the HTML UI.com demos, it'll show you how you can use that in IE6 as well. Canvas, though, is one I want to show you guys because Canvas is where we started. When you came in, you saw the star field example flying on the screen. That was a simple Canvas tag. So to use Canvas, if we go to our simple website where we started today, we talked about Canvas earlier, why don't I just drop a Canvas tag in here? So Canvas, ID equals my canvas, width equals 500, height equals 400. That's all you have to do for Canvas. Canvas is a simple tag. There's nothing really complex to it. How can you support older browsers, or what can you do for older browsers? Anything in between the Canvas tag is what we'll render when Canvas is not available. So I could say in between here, your browser doesn't work. Or whatever variation on that message you want to put in there. So if Canvas isn't supported, that will be shown. Now at this point, nothing's going to happen though, because what is Canvas? It's an API-based drawing surface for HTML5, which means pixel by pixel, you can draw whatever you want. It's not like SVG. SVG is vector-based, which means that it maintains a collection of objects in memory, much like the HTML DOM, that you can then manipulate and work with through code. Canvas is all API-based, so to do anything on Canvas, you have to use JavaScript. And this is that evolution of HTML5 in the new generation. JavaScript and HTML working together to give us a new future. So to make this work at all, I'm going to have to come up here and add a little script. I'll say in my script area, type equals text/JavaScript. And then inside of this, depending on whether I'm using jQuery or just doing raw scripting, I can say var c equals document.getElementById, and my ID is my canvas. And then the one thing that you have to do for Canvas, and this is how you detect if Canvas is available, you have to say get context. So I can say get context to D. If I get my context here, now I have a surface I can start drawing on. Now I can start typing in API code for drawing boxes, drawing arcs, whatever it may be, to make my canvas work. So to show you a working example of this, since watching me type is really not that fun, here in IE9 is that same canvas surface. I've just got a canvas area drawn here, outlined in the box. When I click on my canvas surface, I'm going to draw a circle and a square. Impressive, right? No, not really. And now I know we're getting to late morning here, but if you think about what it took to do a circle in web development before Canvas, you had to fire a request back to the server, get that server to send back an image to you, then use JavaScript to update the page to display a circle. Now we can just call a simple API with native HTML and do anything we can imagine inside of the browser without making those extra network hops. So this works fine. We can right-click this, see this is all just HTML, but what happens when we get over to IE6? So by default, IE6 displays for us that message that's in between our opening and closing canvas tags. Your browser does not support Canvas. But there are two alternatives to help you fix this. Explorer Canvas, which is a JavaScript-based solution, and this is a polyfill that uses JavaScript to replicate the Canvas API in IE6. So now you see in the same IE6, I can use the same exact code, and if I click in here and JavaScript executes, I'll see my elements drawn. Now again, in this isolated environment where we are right now, JavaScript's not allowed to execute, so we're not seeing that, but you'll find that when you run this in your IE6 test environment, it'll be drawn here as well. Flash Canvas is similar in that it replicates the Canvas API, but it uses Flash instead of JavaScript to make that happen. The advantage of this implementation is it performs a bit faster than the JavaScript implementation today. So you can use this, and in IE6, you can see now we get the exact same code doing Canvas in IE6. So even something as modern as Canvas can be used across all browsers today. So that's HTML. Let's talk a few minutes about CSS3. CSS3 has the sexy parts of HTML, or rather the HTML5 umbrella. Here we find things like our drop shadows, our rounded corners, and useful things like CSS3 selectors. So while selectors don't get talked about often, these are one of the things you may end up using the most. Broadly supported across all modern browsers today. If you use something like jQuery, jQuery supports the CSS3 syntax, so you can use this selector syntax inside of the jQuery selectors and then make it work across all browsers. But it allows us to do things like nth child, in this case, odd, or nth child even, or nth child every third row with that third example up there, 3n. This is useful for doing things like alternating row colors. So by applying these simple stylings, now rather than doing a row class, alt row class, and rendering out all these different class names just to do something as simple as alternating row colors, we can use CSS3 selectors to do that automatically for us. But what I really want to show you, because we don't just have a ton of time left here, is CSS3 color. Most of us as web developers today know about hex color. We can list off any number of those. We all know that white is FFFFF. We all know black is 00000. However, if I were to ask you to give me any color in between, it becomes a little bit more difficult. It's not really intuitive model to us. So we have two new models for color in CSS3. HSL, hue, saturation, lightness, and RGB. And that one should be obvious. The one that's interesting here is HSL, because what HSL allows us to do is pick a color from 0 to 360, that's just a degree on the color wheel, and then using percentages specify how saturated it should be and how light it should be. What this allows us to do in a very easy way is create color schemes, because now we can easily pick a color and then create easy variants on that. So let me give you an example so you can see what I'm talking about. Back in our demos here, we go over to our CSS3 color. I've got a page that will allow me to specify any HSL color. So I come in here and let's just say 67. And we can't see it we can't see it in IE9 because IE9 doesn't yet support HSL color. So you need a polyfill for this. There's a JavaScript polyfill that will convert automatically HSL color for you to hex colors. So in browsers that support it, which would be all your mobile browsers, as well as browsers like Chrome here, we can take that same page and we run that code. So put in, let's say, 67. I put in one color code, and by varying the lightness of this, I can easily create a color scheme. Now, I can apply more math and create complementary schemes or whatever it may be, but now it becomes very easy to maybe give a theme selector to your users or whatever it may be, because it's easy to adjust that color in a predictable way. And you notice the last color box there is actually overlapping a background that we're seeing come through the color. It's because there are also alpha channels available to you in HSL and RGB, so you can also additionally, optionally specify a transparency degree. And this works in all modern browsers as well. So it's a simple thing, but it's giving us a lot of power that we didn't have before and giving us a simple way to adjust things like color in a predictable manner. So check this out, HSL color. The other thing, though, that I think you guys have to see before we're done today, the thing that you see a lot of when you look at websites talking about CSS3 is custom fonts and borders and backgrounds. Borders and backgrounds is where we find our rounded corners, where we find our drop shadows, where we find all these things that we've kind of thought about for a long time and used a lot of weird, hacky techniques to achieve up to this point. But now with HTML5 or CSS3, we get very simple APIs to do these things natively. Border radius gives us rounded corners, and box shadow gives us drop shadow. This works across all modern browsers. It works across works across mobile devices, and there's actually a polyfill to make this work across older browsers like IE6 as well. The other side of this equation, web fonts, you can use custom fonts across all browsers today. The problem with web fonts has never been the technology. You could use custom web fonts as far back as IE 5.5. The problem has always been the licensing, because fonts are licensed in very unique ways that we don't usually think about. They're usually for use on a desktop, and the creators of those fonts don't usually give you a license to just let anybody download them, which is essentially what happens when you're deploying it on a website. So the solution has come in the form of these web font providers that give you easy access that use fonts licensed for the web, and then an easy way to embed them into your websites. So let's take a look at both of these things, and then we can take a look at some of our wrap-up notes as well. So the examples we've been looking at today, in fact, the first place we started, we saw we have lots of custom web fonts, or at least two of them. So the whole section area here, we see HTML and CSS3. That's obviously not one of our standard web fonts or our standard browser fonts, but if I select this, you can see it is actually just text. Same for the handwriting up here. If I were able to get my selector up here and highlight this text, you'd see this is just text as well. So how am I getting these fonts into the page? How can I use these? Clearly, it's working across browsers. What is the technique? There are a few providers for web fonts. One of them that I'll mention today is called Font Squirrel. Font Squirrel is a place where you can go browse any number of fonts. A lot of them, or most of them, I think, are free. and then you can download those fonts in the four common formats that you really need to broadly support web fonts today. TrueType format for Safari and Chrome, EOT or embedded open type was for older IE versions. WAF is the new modern open format for web fonts, and that's where we're sort of moving in the web world. And SVG, scalable vector graphics, for some of the iOS devices that don't let you download the files you need for fonts. So you pick your font face, it gives you a package. To use it in your website is actually quite simple. Once you have your font resources in your project, in your CSS, you simply define an @fontface tag, or the @fontface tag. Specify a name for your font family. This can be anything you want. In this case, we're just calling it Spring Steel Serif Heavy because that's the name of the font. And then you provide the source of the various web fonts you have. And by providing multiple sources, you ensure broad compatibility with all the devices that are out there. You don't have to do it this way, but it's what you need to do if you want to target all devices. And then when you want to consume this, all you have to do is reference this font name inside of your code. So I can come down from here. If I had a new class in my CSS, so my class, and inside of my class, let's say I want to use this font, I simply say font. And then where I would normally specify something like Arial or one of the common web fonts, I simply say Spring Steel Serif Heavy. And that's going to allow me to use that font name I defined inside of anywhere I want to use that font in my style sheets. This will now universally work across all browsers because it's going to serve the right type depending on the browser that's accessing this, and I can use those fonts in my projects. The other thing I said we would look at is borders and shadows. So in that same page we were just looking at, there are rounded corners, drop shadows, all kinds of things going on here being provided by CSS3. How do you use these and use them in universal fashion? Well, using them in CSS3 natively should be pretty obvious and straightforward. We already talked about how this is just a simple matter of defining some browser prefix tags and you're off to the races. The thing that I want to leave you with here about this is how do I use this in older browsers? Well, it turns out there's actually a polyfill for that that's pretty interesting and powerful. There's something called CSS3 Pi. So let me come in here and show this to you. One of these, all these links I'll share with you guys afterwards. So let me get it from this approach. CSS3Pi.com. What this does is it provides a polyfill that allows you to use drop shadows, rounded corners, gradients, all sorts of things, not only in browsers that don't support it, like in some cases IE9. IE9 is not supporting some of these things today, but it will also allow you to use it in things like IE6. So you actually can get some of the CSS3 sexy features that we traditionally don't think are available by using a polyfill like CSS3 Pi in older browsers. Now there are some caveats, there are some gotchas. It's not just perfect support, but if you want to try to bring that polyfill strategy to the game and make all browsers look the same, using a polyfill like CSS3 Pi will let you achieve some of these new, sexier CSS3 features in older browsers as well. Now, there are a lot of neat demos here, and as I mentioned, because I knew we would have a lot more to look at than we have time in these short sessions, all this is available online, so you can play around, look at the code, get deep into it. But what you should be realizing at this point is that these things can be used cross-browser. These things can be used not only across modern browsers, but they can be used across mobile browsers, and they can be used across old browsers, depending on the strategy you choose. So the really wrap-up question to all of this, where we really wanted to drive with today's content, and the slides have this stuff in here for you guys to explore, is that mobile is a great place for these things. Mobile sort of represents a Tomorrowland of sorts because there is less legacy there. You can do all this stuff broadly on mobile, and the next update, the Windows Phone, will bring it almost up to par with all the other phones that are out there, so you can do all this HTML5 and CSS3 stuff. So this is a great vertical target. Even if you decide that, no, I'm not ready to do this in browsers, it's a great way to get yourself involved in rich applications on mobile devices. And the question that I asked to you guys at the beginning, or I asked you guys to think about, is the one I'll put to you now. It's not a matter of, can I use HTML5 and CSS3 today? The question I want you guys to ask yourselves is, which HTML5 or CSS3 technique will you try today? And hopefully, if we've done our job correctly, while we rush through a lot of information, we put a lot of examples up and down, you've at least seen one technique that you find interesting enough with the techniques you need to use it universally enough to use it in your projects practically today. Fair enough? If anything went by too fast, or if you need more in-depth explanation, there's related content here at TechEd, of course, some additional sessions. I believe both of these are tomorrow. I will be at the Web Platforms TLC in the Expo area tomorrow, and I'll be at the Telerik booth today. And, of course, you can contact me as well. The track resources will be in the slides. The thing they want me to show you before you guys leave, of course, is this. So make sure you scan this, go online, fill out your evaluations, tell TechEd how you're liking the content. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this content. You can always email me if you have questions. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of TechEd, and thank you guys very much for your attention this morning.